All right. Hey, if you've got a Bible, go ahead and open it to Mark chapter 2. That is going to be where we are at tonight. Before we dive in, fall retreat, I'm happy to hear that there will be a dance this year. I'd say 3 of the top 5 moments of my life have happened at a fall retreat dance, and I've got 4 kids, so I'll let you kind of figure that one out. Fall retreat dances, they are a wild thing. I've gotten the privilege to be DJ Rough Around the Edges for 4 fall retreat dances. We do well. We do well with some dances. So I don't know, maybe will we have a guest appearance of DJ Rough Around the Edges, Andy? That was a very hesitant yeah. Okay, I'm gonna work on that because I would love to DJ it. All right, well, hey, if we have not met yet, my name is Stephen, and I am one of the pastors at Great Oaks, the church that Salt Company is a part of, and we are so glad that you are joining us at Salt Company tonight. If you are new to joining us, we just want you to know Salt Company is pretty simple. What we do on Thursdays is we sing worship songs, we open the Bible. That's what we do every single Thursday, and then throughout the week, we meet in small groups. We call them connection groups that meet in dorms and apartments where you can encourage each other in your walks with Jesus. So that is what we do at Salt Company and what we're gonna keep doing tonight in Mark chapter 2. The last 3 weeks, we've been answering the question as Salt Company, what is the gospel? That's been kind of the question that we've been working through. And in week 1, we saw the good news of Jesus is that he satisfies us like nothing else in the world. He's offering us living water, something that can actually satisfy and quench the longings in our hearts. In week 2, we saw what exactly the gospel is. That is the good news that God saves sinners through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Then last week, what did we see? We saw Jesus doing a full day of ministry, all day healing people and healing all sorts of problems. And what did we see? We saw the good news is that Jesus can heal any problem that we're facing, and he will heal anyone who comes to him. So that's what we've been seeing. And at this point, maybe you're thinking, all right, 3 weeks in, if you've been here each of those weeks, maybe you're thinking, I've got it. I know what the gospel is. I hear it. I get it, I understand it. Well, tonight, we're gonna kind of land the plane on this theme of what is the gospel. And the story that we're gonna look at is really kind of gonna ask us the question, are you sure you get it? This story is kind of the litmus test of whether or not you actually understand the gospel. Even if you've been here all 3 weeks, it's possible that you've been nodding along the whole time. Maybe you're thinking, yes, Jesus satisfies. Yes, Jesus saves. Yes, Jesus heals. This is good. You could say, I get it. I understand. But it's going to be this story tonight that's going to test that. Do you actually, though? The encounter we're going to explore in Mark 2 takes us directly to what I would say is the heart of the gospel, the heart of Christianity. That if you don't see what we are going to see in this story, that you really don't understand the core of Christianity. It's the story of Jesus calling a man named Levi to follow him as one of his disciples. It's a very simple story. But here's why it's a test of whether or not you get the gospel. It's because Levi, we're going to find out, was a wicked person, and yet he receives grace. And then, as the story continues, there's this group of people who can't handle that are appalled that Jesus is showing him grace. They don't understand it, and it exposes that they really don't understand the purpose of Jesus' ministry and the good news of what he's offering to us. So if we can see what's going on in this story, what we're going to find are some of the greatest and deepest comforts of the gospel. And simultaneously, in this story, we are going to see some of the greatest challenges that the gospel presents to us. Challenges that are really a test if we get it or not. So here's how we're going to work through this passage. First, we're going to see a gospel reality, that there is no one so bad that they can't have grace. And then we're going to see a second gospel reality, that there's no one so good that they don't need it. So first, there's no one so bad that they can't have grace. Second, there's no one so good that they don't need it. So let's start in Mark verse 13. Here's how this story begins. It says, Jesus went out again beside the sea. The whole crowd was coming to him, and he was teaching them. So here's the setting of the story. Jesus had been doing a lot of ministry in a town named Capernaum. It was the hometown of the disciples Peter, James, and John. We'll see why that's important in a moment. And after a lot of ministry in the surrounding villages, Galilee, Jesus and his disciples come back to what was kind of their home base, Capernaum. And the town hears about it. They show up. Jesus heals a paralytic who was lowered through a roof. And that's where verse 13 picks up. Jesus goes out beside the sea. The town is still following him, amazed at his teaching and his healings. But the amazement is about to turn into confusion. Look at verse 14. It says, then passing by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax office. And he said to him, follow me. And he got up and followed him. That's the call of Levi. Levi is better known as Matthew. That was the more common name that we might recognize. And he becomes a disciple of Jesus. He goes on to write the first gospel in our Bible, the Gospel of Matthew. And here we are seeing Jesus' call of Levi. He's teaching out by the sea. He comes back in. They're coming back into town. He sees Levi in the tax office. He calls him. Levi gets up and follows him. Now, look back at verse 14. You see those two words that Jesus says, follow me. Here's what one pastor, Matt Carter, points out. He says that follow me in the Greek is actually a command, not a request. So Jesus is looking at Levi and he commands him, follow me. Now, this looks really simple, right? I just read one verse, but in this one verse story, you could say, we are getting one of the clearest windows into the heart of the gospel. How? Well, you have to understand who tax collectors were in the first century in Israel. The Jews were under Roman occupation, and tax collectors were Jews who collected tax from their own people. That doesn't sound so bad, but wait. They would collect a tax and send that off to Rome. So Rome had the amount that they needed, but then the tax collector was allowed to set the tax rate however high they wanted. And so what they do is they take Rome's portion, but then they would charge an excess fee, and they would keep that money for themselves. And so the Jews saw tax collectors as criminals, thieves, extorting from their own people. But their hatred ran even deeper. That same pastor, Matt Carter, he goes on to point out that the Jews at this point were waiting on the promise of God. They were waiting for God to send a Messiah who would free them from Roman occupation. The Jews saw tax collectors then as helping the enemies of Israel maintain their occupation, that they were standing in complete rejection of the promises of God. So not only were tax collectors hurting their own people, they had committed apostasy against Yahweh, rejected him. So they were traitors, criminals, and had rejected God. So why would a tax collector become a tax collector? Right? If they were so despised, who would ever want to do that? It's very simple. Money. Power. A fast track to wealth. Levi had traded his friends, his family, his faith, his country for wealth. For more money, for more power. That is who Levi is. Now remember, I said this was the hometown of Peter, James, and John. If I were to ask you, hey, who was the worst of the worst in your hometown? Sadly, you could probably come up with an answer. Like if you asked me that, I have a name in my head right now. It's a small world, so I'm not going to say his name. My wife and I were talking about him today. He was a bad dude. Like, even if you grew up in the cities, you could name someone from your high school that everybody knew, yeah, that guy, that girl, they are bad news. Stay away from them. This is their hometown, which means Levi's sin was known. Most likely, Peter, James, John, their friends, their family had been even victims to Levi, that Levi probably extorted from them. That's the scene and what makes it so astounding. Jesus walks up to Levi, sitting in the tax booth, and commands him, "Follow me." You could just picture what each of these characters were thinking, right? Peter, James, and John, they're watching Jesus head towards Levi. They nudge each other like, hey, this should be good. Levi's sitting there. He sees a rabbi approaching him, and he begins to tense up, thinking, okay, here comes yet another rabbi to chew me out. But what happened? Something shocking. In fact, the most shocking thing Jesus had done yet in the town of Capernaum. So far in Mark's gospel, in the town of Capernaum, Jesus has healed someone possessed by a demon. He has healed a paralytic. And yet this, calling a tax collector to follow him, would have been the most shocking thing he had done yet. Other people had healed, but no one had called a tax collector. Now, think about the significance of this next question. Where was Levi sitting when Jesus called him? In his tax office. Think about that. He is in the middle of his criminal activity, the scene of the crime. He's doing the deed that put him in opposition to God's promise. He's in the middle of his sin, and what happens? Jesus goes up and calls him out of it. Right? It's not like Levi finds Jesus on a Sabbath day and goes to a synagogue, a church, and is like, hey, I really want to clean up my life. I can't go back to the tax booth. Levi is in the middle of his repulsive sin, and Jesus walks right up to his tax office and calls him out of it. Everything we're seeing in this interaction is showing us the heart of the gospel. That there is no one so bad that they can't have grace. There is no one so far that Jesus can't find them. Jesus called Levi, the worst of the worst, to follow him even while he was in the middle of his sin. Let me ask you a question. What is the tax booth that Jesus is commanding you to stand up and leave? Some of you are sitting in the middle of sin right now. You're in a tax booth. Right? Levi hoped that his tax booth would give him wealth, power, and influence, what his heart always wanted. What are you hoping that the tax booth you're in will give you? Maybe it's approval, to know that you're accepted. Or maybe it's significance, to know that you matter. Maybe it's security, to know that you're safe, or pleasure, to know that you're happy. What is the sin that you are looking at to satisfy the needs of your heart? What is the tax booth Jesus is commanding you to get up and leave? Can I tell you how I know some of you are sitting in a tax booth right now? Even in a place like Salt Company. It's because the first time I ever attended Salt Company, I was sitting in a tax booth. 14 years ago, I attended my first Salt Company service. And immediately after the service, I walked straight to a house party. I'd grown up going to church. I had great parents, but the summer going into college, I began to really wrestle with, man, am I going to follow Jesus or not? It began to compromise in ways that I hadn't compromised before. And particularly began to really get caught up in the party scene. And I remember the first time I showed up to a Salt Company, knowing that I'd already partied that week, knowing that I was already going to party again later that weekend. The guy on stage, Cody, I'll never forget what he said. He said, do you know the number one time in life that people will regret the most? The first 2 months of college. And I sat there in that moment and I thought to myself, that is me right now. Right now, I was conscious of it. I was like, this moment in my life is the moment that I will regret the most. I know for a fact. And I got up, left Salt Company, went to this house party, and sat in a corner miserable. Because why? Because Jesus was calling me, commanding me to get up out of my tax booth, to leave my sin. I was hoping that it would be the path to friendship, to acceptance, to approval, to know that I mattered. And Jesus was saying, this tax booth offers you nothing. What is the tax booth? That you are looking to satisfy the needs of your heart, but Jesus is commanding you to get up and leave. You see, Jesus pursued Levi because he loved him and because of his grace. And Jesus is pursuing you because he loves you and he has grace for you. There is nothing that you could have ever done that would forfeit his grace for you. And even if you are in the middle of your sin right now, Jesus is commanding you to get up and follow him. There is no one so bad that they can't have Jesus' grace. Jesus isn't waiting for you to clean up your life, to turn it around. He's coming to you right now and offering you grace. That's the great comfort of the gospel. There's no one so bad they can't have grace. But Jesus is about to challenge another group of people. As the story continues, there's another group that he challenges. You see, while some of us need to hear God's grace is for anyone, just as many of us need to hear, you are never so good that you do not need grace. And what happens is the litmus test of the gospel. The group that Jesus challenges misses the heart of the gospel, and the grace shown to Levi proves it. Look at verse 15. It says, while he was reclining at the table in Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who were following him. So Levi's pumped. He's got out of his tax booth. He throws this party to honor Jesus, invites all the friends that he has, other tax collectors and sinners. We don't know what kind of sinners these were, but these were probably public, known sins. Things like drunkenness, sexual immorality, crime. That's the company of Jesus. And there's a group who can't believe it. Look at verse 16. When the scribes, who were Pharisees, saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? The scribes and Pharisees, they were the religious leaders, and they are appalled by who Jesus is choosing to associate himself with. So who were these Pharisees? Well, in first century Judaism, you had several, you could almost think of them as religious/political parties, and the Pharisees were one of them. There were about 6,000 Pharisees. They were mostly middle-class men who were in the trades, kind of your normal guys in the community. They were devout followers of Judaism. Daniel Aiken points out, he's a scholar, that Pharisees were beloved by the people. They were viewed as one of us, and their desire was to sincerely follow the law of God out of love for him. So they devotedly followed the laws of the Torah, and on top of that, they even followed the traditions of the Jewish people. Here was the problem, though. Even though they were sincere in their devotion, they were sincerely wrong. In pursuit of strict adherence to the law, they had missed God's heart for mercy. And over time, they began to build their identity on law keeping instead of mercy. And as a result, they began to sort people into two groups. Two groups, righteous and sinners. And it's the two groups that we see here in Mark 2. In their minds, there were righteous people and then there were sinners. And here's what happens. When your identity is formed around law keeping, you begin to compare yourself to others to justify your own self. So that's why they were appalled that Jesus would be associating himself, reclining with tax collectors and sinners. How does Jesus respond? Look at verse 17. When Jesus heard this, he told them, "It is not those who are well who need a doctor, but those who are sick. I didn't come to call the righteous, but sinners." This is one of the greatest insights into Jesus' ministry. He came for sinners. It's so simple, but so beautiful. Think about this. Who goes to the doctor? You could say sick people, but actually, do you go to the doctor every time you're sick? No. I try to avoid the doctor all the time. When do you go to the doctor? It's not just when you're sick, but when you're sick and you know you need a solution that comes from outside of you. That a doctor can offer you something for your healing that you don't possess. The ones who go to Jesus, then, the great physician, are only those who realize they're sick and he is their only hope. Now, what exactly is Jesus saying to these Pharisees here? Because it could sound like Jesus is saying, "Hey, Pharisees, don't worry. You're healthy. You're righteous. You don't need a doctor. I'm here to help sick people, but you're good." Is that what Jesus is saying? If it is, then it would be inconsistent with the rest of the Bible and Jesus' own words. As you even continue in the Gospel of Mark in chapter 10, 18, Jesus is going to say, "There is no one good except God himself." Other passages like Romans 3:10, "There is no one righteous, not even one." So what is Jesus doing here? Well, Jesus is entering the mindset of a Pharisee and using their own language. He's saying, you see the world as two groups of people, righteous and sinners. And I'm telling you that I came to call sinners. What is Jesus exposing? As long as you see the world as good people and bad people, and you place yourself in the good people camp, you won't get me. You won't understand the gospel. Why? Because that's not how the gospel works. The gospel is a completely different economy. Unlike Pharisaical religion, the gospel doesn't say there's two types of people, good and bad, righteous and sinner. Instead, the gospel says there are two types of people, sinners and sinners who have been healed by the grace and mercy of Jesus. Those are the only two types of people in the world. No one is good except God alone. There is no one righteous, not even one. Here's the heart of the gospel then. There is no one so bad that they can't be healed. And there is no one so good that they don't need healing. The Pharisees built their identity on law keeping, and in order to justify themselves, sorted the world into righteous and sinners, good and bad. And here's the reality. When we don't understand the gospel, we do the same. Even if you've been following Jesus for years, self-righteousness lives in all of us, seeing ourselves as good and those people as sinners. You see, how do you convince yourself that you're okay? Well, you look for someone else who is worse than you. I might not be perfect, but at least I would never do that. What happens? Just like the Pharisee, it produces pride, hypocrisy. You begin to ignore internal sin. You can't face it because the second you do, your self-righteous perception would crumble. And here's what self-righteousness does. It makes you merciless, without mercy. Why? Well, because if the benchmark of righteousness is how you compare to others, then you actually, in a sick way, need other people to fail around you. Have you ever realized that? You actually need others to be doing worse than you in order to justify yourself. So when someone fails, you might say the right thing, but in your heart, you are not merciful. You're gloating. You're using their failure to reinforce that you are okay. What is Jesus saying? He's saying, if this is how you see the world, then you don't get the gospel. You fail the litmus test. Because the only people Jesus calls are people who know in their guts that they are no more deserving of God's grace than a tax collector. Now, here's the objection if you were in the first century. Because you have a positive view of Pharisees. You'd say, wait, how on earth could it be possible that a devout Pharisee is no more deserving of God's grace than a tax collector? Well, think of it this way. So there are over 40 salt companies across our nation, which is awesome. One of the newest ones is out in Milwaukee, and the lead pastor at that church, his name's Jared. Jared is a former professional basketball player, and I love Jared. I've known Jared for probably a decade now. He is an awesome guy. He's also 6'7" and probably like 290 pounds. A massive human. I am 5'7" and 3/4. Very important. Yes. Thank you, Jaden. Thank you, Anya. 5'7", 3/4. Now, if Jared was up here on this stage and I asked you, who is taller? It'd be obvious. You'd say Jared, and you'd be right. Now, if I changed the question though and I said, hey, who is closer to the moon? You'd stare at me weirdly. Why? Because yes, technically, there are 11 inches and 1/4 difference between Jared and I. But compared to 240,000 miles, that distance between Jared and I is insignificant. The distance between Jared and I is insignificant compared to the distance between us and the moon. When you compare my height to Jared's, it's obvious, he's taller. But when you shift the question to how close are you to the moon, whatever distance there was becomes insignificant. Here's the reality. When you compare the righteousness of a Pharisee to a tax collector, you might say, hey, there's a massive difference there. But when you compare the righteousness of a Pharisee and a tax collector to the holy, perfect righteousness of an eternal God, you realize whatever difference you may have seen is insignificant. Because compared to the holiness of God, we all are in desperate need of a doctor, of a great physician to heal us of sin. That even our good works are like filthy rags compared to his holiness. Here's what the Pharisees were doing. They were saying, we are righteous, they are sinners. And Jesus is saying, no. The only people who get me are the people who know they are no more deserving of grace than the worst of the worst. So here's the litmus test question for you. There's an author named Jerry Bridges, and he asks a question in his book, Transforming Grace. That's one of my favorite questions, and here it is. He says, are there people who, if you were honest, you believe you are more deserving of God's grace than they are? Are there people that if you were honest in your heart of hearts, you still believe you're more deserving of God's grace than they are? If there is, you don't fully get the gospel yet. That's the litmus test. Are you willing to say, I don't deserve grace than any more than anyone else? My junior year of college, this was put to the test for me. I had moved in with a group of guys, and two of the guys went to study abroad, and they got a subleaser for our apartment. And they said, hey, Steven, just so you know, this guy is on probation. I'm like, all right, that's fine. So I meet him, and it turns out that what he was on probation for was a heinous crime. Just pure wicked. And honestly, probably the person who has done the worst thing that I've ever met personally. And I was going to live with him for a semester. And so one night it was just him and I at the apartment, and we didn't have anything going on. We're sitting in the living room, and he says, "Hey, Steven, do you want to hear my story?" At this point, he had repented of his sin, believed in Jesus, became a Christian, and was cooperating with the justice system and was trying to walk and follow Jesus. And so he says, "Do you want to hear my story?" And I reluctantly said, "Sure, man, I'll listen to your story." And for the next 30 minutes, he told me the worst story that I've ever heard of what he had done. And when he finished the story, we literally sat in complete silence for 10 minutes. And in those 10 minutes of silence, what I was thinking about was this question: the test of grace. Do I actually believe that I am no more deserving of God's grace than this guy? And after 10 minutes, I said maybe the hardest sentence I've ever said in my life. I looked at him and I said, I am no more deserving of God's grace than you are. And both of us burst into tears. This is the test of grace. Do I understand that compared to God's holiness, there is no one, absolutely no one, that I am any more deserving of God's grace than? Until you are able to say that sentence, you don't understand the gospel. How you respond to the failures of others reveals your understanding of grace. Pharisaical religion says there's little sins that are okay, you can still be righteous, but then there are big sins that make you a sinner. And it's not just how you respond to other people's sins, it's how you respond to your own failure. Because maybe you would say, hey, I'm quick to offer others grace, but I have a hard time letting myself experience grace. You still see the world like a Pharisee. When you fail, you hide. No one can know. You'll pretend. You minimize how bad sin really is. Because in your mind, if you acknowledge just how bad the sin is, it would destroy your self-perception of being good. Maybe when you fail, you say things to yourself like, how dumb am I? How can I not get over this? I'm better than this. I know better. Why are you so angry at yourself in those moments? It's because your whole justification is built on your performance. Here's what we have to realize. Jesus didn't call us from a tax booth to put us on a treadmill. He called us from a tax booth into grace. And yes, that grace transforms our life, but not in a way to earn God's love, not in a way to keep God's love, but in a way of response to the love that we have in Christ. The litmus test of the gospel. Do you fully understand that there is no one so bad they can't have grace and no one so good they don't need it? Now, how can that be possible? Well, it goes back to the great physician. You see, the cross completely smashes the treadmill of religious comparison, the kind that sorts people into good and bad. The cross is the ultimate statement on grace, that grace is for everyone and everyone needs it. It's the ultimate statement that no sin is more powerful than Jesus' grace. No matter how ugly the tax office, Jesus carried that debt on the cross and paid the penalty in full. The cross is the final word that grace is for everyone and it's for anyone. That there aren't righteous people and sinners, but sinners and sinners who have been healed by Jesus. And how? It's because the great physician left heaven and he bore our sickness on himself so that he can give us his righteousness. He can offer us the cure of grace. Now, what happens when we finally get this? Guys, it creates a culture in this room unlike any other the world has to offer, where there's actually freedom to not wear a mask. There's freedom to experience true joy. Freedom to forgive one another, knowing that we don't have to be perfect. It gives us freedom to associate with people who others are appalled by. It creates a culture of mercy. It kills a culture of performance. It creates a gospel humility. Salt Company, that has to be our culture. One of the things that has to be true is every single one of us needs to know that in this room there is one perfect person, and we sing songs to him on Thursday nights. The rest of us are pretty jacked up and need a doctor. That's the culture and defining mark of this room. People who know what grace is all about. Let's pray. Jesus, would we never move on from the gospel? Instead, would we just move deeper and deeper into it? That the rest of our lives, that we would gain a more accurate understanding of just how holy you are. And that God, as we gain a view of your holiness, would it simultaneously help us appreciate just how great your grace is in our life. And God, would that free us from insecurity, wondering, have you given up on me? Is your love still for me? Knowing that I can never out-sin the grace of Jesus. And would it simultaneously transform each and every one of us into a person marked by joy, by peace, knowing that we don't earn or maintain your love based on what we do, but what was done for us 2,000 years ago. And God, when we get that, would that transform our lives? That we'd say, oh, Jesus, I am going to listen to the command, follow me. Not to impress you, not to impress others, but because following you is the path of life. Walking in obedience to you is how I fulfill the purpose I was created for, to bring glory to your name. Jesus, would we be mesmerized by your grace, and would it transform our lives so that we would more and more reflect you and reflect your glory. Amen.